Greetings to you, friends. It is truly a blessing to be present with you, to know that even in our limitations, in our insecurities, in our imperfections, God's grace is made perfect and allows us to realize the beauty that is possible in this life and in this world. I give gracious thanks for the invitation to be here, to speak with you all, to be in conversation with this part of the Christian community. And it is my hope and prayer that our shared conversation today inspires and moves us to do the necessary work in the world. That is the requirement, that is the duty, that is the call of followers of Christ. You've heard the reading of the text, and I want to give to the text this theme today: power to the people. Power to the people. There was once a young brother, you might have heard of his name before, a young man by the name of Fred Hampton. He was an activist in the city of Chicago. Brother Fred was the chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. Fred was the type of person who simply could not tolerate injustice. There are many things of which we might be intolerant. Some people can't stand if the air conditioner is too cold or if the heat is too high, if there's a little too much humidity. Some folks need just the right amount of milk in their cereal or cream in their coffee. But Fred had a different kind of intolerance. Fred could not tolerate injustice, could not stand to see other people suffering, lacking, being in need. He understood what it meant to wrestle against forces beyond what you can see. At the early age of 10, he organized a weekend breakfast for children in his neighborhood. Fred even cooked the breakfast himself. He prepared food for other children in his neighborhood because he saw that they were in need and he could not tolerate those kids being in need. As a young man, Fred was known for his fiery speeches. He was known for his political passion. And he truly believed that when people get together, there is power in their midst. And I love what he said in one of his speeches. He died as a young man, 21 years of age, but he did so much that he's remembered for because of the passion of his beliefs. He says this. He said that people learn by observation and participation. You can't sit on the sidelines. You've got to get into the game. And I like how he puts it. He says, you can have as many degrees as a thermometer, but if you don't have any practice, you can't walk across the street and chew gum at the same time. Now, I know we're in a university town. We're in a place full of accomplished and educated folk, where some of us are skilled researchers and profound analysts. There are probably as many degrees in this room as a thermometer, but all of our theories mean very little unless we put them into practice. Fred Hampton believed that where the people are, there is power, but the power lies in your practice. You've got to get up and do something. The letter to the Ephesians is not a book of theory. It's a call to action. It is preparation for people who are learning how to put their faith into practice. The book of Ephesians is a clarification of collective purpose. It is a reminder that God has given what? Power to the people. The power of God is not meant to be kept on a shelf, not meant to be bottled up and set aside for preservation, for safekeeping, for opening only on a rainy day. No, the power of God is not made for looking holy and performing piety. It's not designed for looking dignified and acting above the fray. It is not made for seeming progressive but making no progress. No, the power of God equips people to work in the world. Now, it's important that we do not confuse God's power for our own strength. Human beings have this remarkable ability to produce profound impacts on the world. We have transformed hills and valleys into flat land. We have turned metal and stone into skyscrapers and monuments, and it's easy to become convinced that humankind has dominance in the world, that we are preeminent, that we are most important, that our whims and our desires are precisely what we should live by. We pride ourselves on how much we produce, but neglect how many go hungry. We celebrate feats of architectural genius while the unhoused pitch their tents in the streets. We exalt national identity and overlook the ravages of war between nations. We uproot the landscape while the climate shifts and floods rise and fires burn. We preach the gospel of the free market in the face of ever-increasing poverty. This is not the way things have to be, but this is the consequence of choosing poorly. This is what happens when humanity strays from a righteous path. This is what happens when the powers that be are drunk on domination. The church in Ephesus, the people, the Ephesians, they exist in a world where they are far from dominant. The social and political power lies in the Roman Empire. The early church is like an infant, full of life but very vulnerable. Learning more each and every day and growing by leaps and bounds. But I understand this about infants. You can't handle newborns like you handle teenagers or like you handle toddlers. You have to carry them until they can move on their own. You have to help them until they can help themselves. And how do they learn to help themselves? Through observation and participation. Our text today is an invitation to observe and to participate. It's an opportunity to go beyond thinking well and lean into doing well. Because I'm convinced that the gospel is both word and deed. It's not merely what Jesus the Christ proclaimed, it is how Jesus the Christ lived. And you can't live in the way of Christ unless you are prepared and empowered. The words of our text today are the finishing piece of a longer application. The book of Ephesians is a comprehensive expression of God's plans and purposes. It's meant to show a community how to live, how to move, how to have being in the world. It is a message of activation that leads them from baptism to bold living. They have been preparing for this moment, and now it's time to act. Now, how do we interpret these instructions? I would say it's very easy to get wrapped up in the imagery of the text and miss the point. So I think we have to start with careful observation. Strength, armor, enemies. This sounds like getting ready for war. And I fear that too many followers of Christ have become warmongers for Christ. Not people moving with vulnerable faith, but tyrants picking religious fights. Now there are some fights we cannot avoid, but there are plenty that we can and simply don't. It becomes too easy to justify our conflicts in the name of Christ. It becomes too easy to weaponize our sacred texts and sharpen our theologies to cut others. Too many souls are damaged by friendly fire and careless words. It is surprising what people will say and do when they think God approves of it. The way of Christ is meant to make disciples, not mercenaries, not hired spiritual guns unloading their doctrinal ammunition on the world. And if it sounds violent, that's because it is. If we are the only sermon that someone ever sees, what kind of God would they believe in? What kind of God would they see? The armor of God is not designed for attack. It is built for resistance. And what precisely are we resisting? Well, the text makes clear for us that we are not wrestling against flesh and blood, not against people, not against Facebook memes, not against misinformation. Our struggle truly is not simply located in the binary of Republicans and Democrats. It is not in the binary of progressives and conservatives. It is not truly in the binary of one religion against another, one nation against another. Rather, all of these things are symptoms of fundamental root causes and issues. We can put a lot of language to our particularities, but at the heart, there is a conflict of the soul. Who is it that we believe is our neighbor? Who do we believe to be the children of God? Who is deserving of grace and mercy? Who is deserving of damnation and condemnation? These are the spiritual struggles. Not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. That sounds a lot bigger than, I don't know, Ohio State versus Michigan. The stakes are a little higher. The questions are a little heavier. The consequences are much deeper. The struggle that we're in is not one of superficial petty grievances. It's one of a fundamental understanding of what and who we are meant to be in the world. I told you earlier, Fred Hampton could not tolerate injustice. I fear that the church tolerates far too much. Understands itself as being safe and sequestered, as sealed off from so much of the pain and suffering of this world, often we are not looking for more ways to get involved. We are looking for more ways to remove ourselves from caring. And I will admit, it can be overwhelming to feel like you need to have an opinion, a perspective on every single thing happening in the world every day. I'm here to relieve you of that burden. We are not equipped for holding all of these things in tension in our singular human frames. I believe at best, we are called to community that helps us hold these burdens together. To community that recognizes we all have strengths and gifts and talents and abilities, and it is not for all of us to try to do everything, but to recognize that collectively we can do much. The nature of our struggle is not against superficial enemies. So what exactly are we preparing for? Why do we need the armor of God? Well, I am convinced that in this instance, armor is an acknowledgement that we are entering into spaces in this world that can be damaging and harmful if we are not protected. Places that can erode our sense of faith, our sense of courage, our sense of trust, if we do not commit ourselves to proper protection. Now, I remember learning about this in Sunday school as a child, and I loved putting the little pieces on the felt board. I may be dating myself to a certain time and place, but we would have, before we had all of these digital developments, we had the little felt board and the little pieces that we would stick to it. And we had all the different pieces of the armor, the breastplate of righteousness, and the sword of the Spirit, and the helmet of salvation, and the belt of truth, and the shoes with the gospel of peace, and all of these pieces. And we would see this image of this soldier seemingly ready for battle. But the older I get, the more I understand it's not so much that the soldier was preparing to fight a battle, but rather the soldier was prepared to cross into dangerous territory. As I look at these elements of the armor from the perspective of time and age and experience, I come to understand that they are really to prepare us to be well and flourishing in the midst of destructive circumstances. I read the belt of truth and I think of what it means to speak truthfully and confidently in a world of ignorance and purposeful misinformation. What does it mean to counteract lies? What does it mean to open ourselves up to the possibility of truth that cuts through the misinformation, through the smoke and the mirrors? What does it mean to restrain myself from sending out or posting or retweeting or sending to my text groups things that I have maybe not thought about, things that I have not considered, things that I have not reckoned with, things that I have not researched or investigated? What does it mean for the belt of truth to be the thing that cinches me closer to an understanding that sometimes the best way to be truthful is to be silent, because if I speak, I cannot know what it is I'm saying? I wonder, what if the breastplate of righteousness is really about the protection of our hearts? About the idea of our innermost being protected from a world of slings and arrows that would swiftly cut us down? What if the way of Christ focuses our attention such that our hearts are not given over to things that would destroy us from the inside out? What does it mean to have shoes on your feet that prepare you for the gospel of peace? Maybe it means that everywhere I go, peace follows. Maybe it means that when I enter into diverse circumstances, I come with the understanding that I am not here to make enemies. I am simply here to reflect the power of God that is in us. What if the shield of faith is the recognition that on Christ the solid rock we stand? What if it is the acknowledgement that we hold to a community of faith as a way of protecting our minds from nihilism, from the fear of utter chaos, from the belief that nothing good is possible, nothing good is redeemable in this world? And what if it might be that the sword of the Spirit is not a thing we are meant to carry in our hands, but rather the thing that needs no defense from us? What would it mean if the Word of God is the thing that actually opens up the possibility of us truly being beloved community? I like the way that the writer ends this passage. A reminder to do two things: to pray and to persevere. At no point are the Ephesians told to go out and pick fights. At no point are they told to dominate and to colonize and to take over. At no point are they instructed to be on the offense. But at all times they are meant to be vigilant, to be covered. I'm a believer that this letter to the Ephesians is an instruction for how to get into good trouble. You might be familiar with this idea, getting into good trouble. The late activist and representative John Lewis said this: get into good trouble, necessary trouble. And I am convinced that the gospel of Jesus Christ gives power to the people, because the gospel of Jesus Christ is made to get us into good trouble. My friends, if you truly want to see power given to the people, if you truly want to see the transformation of community, if you truly want to see people filled with hope and faith and trust and love, understand that the battle is not to convince them or to force them into belief or acceptance. Rather, our job is to show up armored against a world that we know resists such truth. Perhaps our role, our work, is to get into good trouble today. And it is my hope and my prayer that as Christian community gathered together in this place, but all across the world, we would understand the necessity, the meaning, the value of being armored not for our own benefit, our own advantage, but so that we can withstand the forces that conspire against good trouble. Where the people are gathered, there is power. So let there be power to the people to pray, to persevere, to carry on in the good work